Welcome, everyone, to today's program presented by Main Street America. It's an organizational health checkup during the COVID-19 crisis. My name is Kelly Hummerkhauser. I am the Manager of Education here at Main Street America. Before we get into today's program, first I'll give a quick introduction of our speakers. With us today, we have Kathy LaPlante. She is the Senior Program Officer and Director of Coordinating Programs at the National Main Street Center. We also have Donna Harris, Principal of Heritage Consulting, Inc. We are so glad to have these two Main Street self-proclaimed fundraising gurus with us today. And their vast experience in Main Street organizations, downtown redevelopment, and getting organizations through rough points will add to all of our ability to weather the crisis and really think through how our Main Street programs are supported, as well as our local businesses at this time. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to ensure that everyone in the audience can participate via the webinar platform. If you are new to using GoToWebinar, please make note, you are automatically muted. You may use either telephone or computer audio to listen in. You can control your choice under the audio section of your control panel. We welcome you to submit your questions at any time using the question function on your control panel. We're going to try to address all questions at the end of the program. If we're unable to address your question, we encourage you to reach out to us, mainstreet@savingplaces.org. We will triage your questions and do our best to get back to you in a timely manner. We do have a capacity audience for today, so if you are unable to stay through this entire program, there is a slight chance that if you leave and try to come back, you won't be able to get back in. But please note, this program is being recorded, and hello to everyone who is viewing this at a later time. So just want to make a note, all of us at Main Street are here together for this challenging moment. We want to make sure that you are aware that the Main Street America Network is here to support you, and at Main Street America, we are doing our best to develop resources to help weather this crisis. So we encourage you to check out the resources available at mainstreet.org/COVID-19 resources. This is information on funding programs, additional webinars, your peer exchange through the point if you're a Main Street America member. Take advantage of everything that's available to you at this time because it is important to stick together in this moment. So without further ado, I do want to turn the program over to our presenters for today. And just a note, I've given a couple of messages off the top here that the handout for the PDF of the slides is not fully functioning. We will make sure to hand that out to everyone after the program. So please don't worry if you're unable to open that PDF right now. We are aware of the problem and we will do our best to triage it during the program. All right. Take it away, Donna and Kathy.
Thanks a lot, Kelly. And again, this is Kathy. Want to thank Donna Harris for joining us on this webinar as well today. The reason this webinar came about is you've all done an outstanding job working with your communities in helping your businesses from the time before businesses had to shut down. And I know some of your states, some of your businesses might still be open. But we really said, well, gosh, we can't just focus on the businesses in downtown. We have to do something that addresses the need of our local Main Street organizations. Most of you who are nonprofits that are out there, we know there's a wide range of how you are all funded, but this webinar is intended to just try to help take a look at some of the issues we've been hearing about. So today, I'm going to cover some of the organizational health checkup, the changes that are happening for what you're doing programmatically, but also how funding might change for the operations and what sort of procedures do you have in place for holding meetings and gathering your partners. And Donna's going to do a bit of the budget review, sort of talking about anticipated lost revenue resources and what you need to do to prioritize your expenditures going forward. So again, under organization health checkup, really assessing those major changes, maintaining what we're doing now, and then reviewing that funding structure and budget. Again, prioritizing your outreach for revenue retention, if not some expansion, and looking ahead to see what anticipated lost revenue sources there might be. So the webinar basically will have 3 sections. That checkup, we're going to talk about communications. And one of the messages that we've really been trying to get out there is that local Main Street programs are the best chance for downtowns and neighborhood district recovery. So please keep that in mind. We think you are at the front lines. We're going to talk about, building on your mission and how you're communicating, not just with your businesses, but also your funders and stakeholders. And then the last section will talk about fundraising for the future, what might happen with municipalities, how you might be changing due to events, and then potential federal funding sources that might be available out there. So some of the things that we've had calls on, how your programs have changed organizationally in the last few weeks, if not almost a month, is that your boards are no longer meeting in person. Some might not even have met at all, even electronically. Many of you have reached out to us to say that this is typically the time of year when your spring pledge campaigns, membership campaigns have gone on, and so they have been canceled or postponed. Many of you have also talked about fundraising events and special events that have been canceled, and that has always been key as far as providing a piece of the puzzle in your fundraising picture. As we've always touted, Main Street should have diverse funding sources, right? Getting money from as many sources as possible. If you rely solely on event income, you're probably in real trouble right now. If we've only are counting on downtown businesses supporting us, we're probably in a little bit of trouble now. Most of your Main Street offices are closed and you're all working remotely. So that means you're losing face time with your businesses and your stakeholders. And I heard from some of you that after businesses closed, you lost communication with them either because they aren't connected by email or you don't have their email addresses. And so what are you going to do in order to reach those people? And the future funding of our programs is really unknown beyond June 30th. We thought many of you would probably be doing okay up to June 30th. You'd already gotten your city allocations, but now going forward, we don't know what that means as far as city budgets. We certainly don't know what businesses will be able to donate. There might also be other things that have changed very dramatically for you. So what steps should we be taking now? One question we dealt with a few communities last week is just making sure you do have the ability to meet. Are you holding board meetings? And I think the full board should be involved in any discussions, not just the executive committee. But we had a couple calls last week from folks who said our bylaws don't allow us to meet electronically. Sometimes your bylaws say you can change them by written notice. So if that's in there. So we put an example of what you might work into your bylaws if you don't already have it there that will allow your boards to meet that way. One of the first things your board needs to do is to start discussing how you're going to change your workload, what that is going to mean to the change in your budget and your programming. So where are the priorities going forward? And I think you've all made that shift. You've all shifted to really working on the priority under economic vitality. Our businesses are closed, our restaurants are closed, our downtowns, there's no parking problem in most any downtown today. So your board needs to look at the work plan and figure out what will be postponed and what will be removed so that where can the funds be redirected. If you've got events that are coming up, and it seems like most people are canceling events through May, some are even going into June right now, are the resources that you had set aside for those events better spent someplace else? So your board needs to determine what other items are not urgent. And I know you don't want to let go of some of your favorite things, you know, planting flowers, putting up new banners, even your facade grant programs, professional development, travel. Donna's going to talk a bit about staffing as well. We really have to show that our primary mission through the end of this year is helping our small businesses. So while we always tout the balanced Main Street 4-point approach, you're going to have to put some more energy into economic vitality right now. Donna?
Sure. I think most of you are beginning to understand the cash flow issues that you're facing right now. As Kathy mentioned before, the scenario planning is really not hard. I mean, it's a term that I think you already use all the time when you put together your budget materials. And looking at your approved budgets and identifying what you know you're going to lose, and what and looking at those events and saying, all right, well, what do we plan for if we're going to lose that revenue? You might actually have already canceled an event that maybe nets 10,000. That's if you're lucky. But if you ask the sponsors if they're willing to donate their sponsorship money that you already have in hand, maybe you can cut that loss from 10,000 to maybe 8. So there are ways of looking at these scenarios so that you're trying to maintain as much cash in the checkbook as you possibly can. Now, what I would like to suggest is that you create separate budget for each likely scenario and then share them with the board in advance of a board meeting. You can use Zoom, you can use Google Hangout, or whatever conference call platform that you use. But it's certainly something that the executive director should be highly involved with. This is not something that the board does in secret by itself or just the executive committee does. I would really encourage the staff to be highly involved with these kind of scenario plannings, because they're critical to you know, all the information about these events and activities, is they're the glue that holds all of the that holds most of the Main Street organization together. So really what you may want to be doing is, from a scenario planning standpoint, is look at really just the next 90 days. And then when you come to that conclusion, you can implement it. But then we're also going to talk a lot in the middle of this session about how you inform people about your plans, how you inform your stakeholders, your constituents, your supporters. So that's a really critical role to play. But regarding cash flow, cash is king. How much you have in the checkbook or have in a fund balance is really critical for the next 90 days, particularly, or for the next 6 months. But I hope that most of you have budgeted for a surplus over the years, and which permits the organization to build up a reserve of a number of months of revenue, a rainy day fund. And ideally to have 3 or 6 months worth of operating costs in a CD, or even in your checking account would be ideal. But if you do have a reserve, now will be the time to use some of it. That's a board decision for them to decide. All right, if we have 3 months of operating budget in our checkbook, then we'll go ahead and use that, because we have plans for how we are going to raise revenue when the recovery begins. If your board is considering these scenario planning exercises, they'll also be looking at what activities to cut or postpone given the dire situation. But if you don't have any reserves, you don't have any money coming in, your choices will be much harder. The big ticket items will come under close scrutiny first. Staff costs, as you know, are usually the highest cost item in any local Main Street budget. And we're going to talk about some options for staffing and how to look at it. if the cutting staff is really necessary in a few minutes. So some things you can do to speed up cash or cash inflow into your budget would be to look at the restricted grant funds that you have now. You all have relationships with your funders, whether they're city government, whether they're foundations, whether they're local corporations. They may have given you money with particular restrictions, like we're going to plant flowers or we're going to hang banners or whatever, but this would be the time to go back to them and ask them if they can please release those restrictions so that you can use the money for basic activities like you're doing now, helping your small businesses. Some foundations may allow you to do that, but if you don't ask, you're not going to be able to use that money in the way that is most beneficial to you, which should have it for unrestricted operating funds. Some of you may also have government funds that appropriations that may be coming to you. Again, this might be an opportunity to ask for that money to be sped up, at least for this fiscal year. Many of you have budgets that are in preparation right now or maybe just completed, so you might have some idea about what you might be getting after July 1st. But if you can get any revenues from local government that are owed you sooner rather than later for this fiscal year, go ahead and ask. You might have tickets that have been paid for already from special events that you hold or fundraising events. You can ask people if they would like a refund, and then also ask them if they would be willing to donate the funds now. And if they do, please make sure you send a thank you and a donation receipt as soon as possible so that they understand that they have converted their ticket price to a donation to your organization. The same thing with sponsorship for canceled events or postponed events. Ask them if they want a full or partial refund, but certainly ask them if they have the ability to donate the funds and to send a donation receipt right away. The new stimulus bill that's just been passed is aimed primarily at small business, but it does have some provisions in there for nonprofits. You all should read it because you're going to need to be helping your small businesses to review it. And you also, in reading it, may come to the conclusion that there might be opportunities for your own Main Street organizations. Now, these SBA loans can be for businesses or nonprofits, and they can be referred to. You can see more about it on the Main Street America's COVID-19 resource page at the National Main Street Center's website. So your message to your donors now is really that you're making very hard choices about keeping the businesses that are still open alive in your downtown district. And though that is a very core and important role that you play, and there's nobody else that's going to do it. So that's a very important message for you to bring to any funder that you're asking them to release from restrictions for other grants that you have. You're going to have to put on, even if it's pretty depressing right now, an optimistic view about what it's going to be like for the recovery and what kind of things that your organization is going to do to actually make a big difference in your downtown. If you do take out a loan or credit line, you have to have some idea how it's going to be paid back. Your funders are going to want to know that. They're also, if you're going to be cutting the budget, talk about that you're going to do it in a strategic way, that you've eliminated programs that make no sense anymore, or at least not like for the next 6 months, like, putting up banners or what have you. And that you're going to reinstate some programs that maybe you're going to put to the side when we all are back in recovery. Particularly if you're canceling events that are bringing in significant revenues to you, make sure that you can tell your funders and your supporters what your plans are. Maybe they will postpone to September or October, or how you're going to make an effort to bring back that money. And then acknowledge that you're going to be asking them again, not just now for their support, but once recovery begins. Kathy?
Yeah, thanks, Donna. Donna mentioned the sort of rainy day fund, which is something we've always spoken about, but we know that as small nonprofits, not all communities have been able to do that. I think going forward, we're emphasizing it now so that as things continue to improve for us, that we learned a really valuable lesson here, that if we had 3 to 6 months of operating, we wouldn't be in such a situation now to be worried about the continuation of our Main Street program. So as you plan, when we recover from this in years forward, plan to have that rainy day fund. And as I've always taught communities to do, set a policy locally that if you are having a major fundraising event, whether it brings in $10,000 or $300,000, make that commitment to say we're going to take 5% or whatever percent and set that aside in that rainy day fund. You might also solicit people specifically for that. You know, once we're recovered from this, we've all learned that lesson. We might be able to get people to actually help fund that rainy day thing. It might be a pledge campaign every year just to your board of directors. Hey, would every board member kick in $100 to help create our rainy day funds that will only be used in times like this when we have a real crisis within our community or our organization. And it also reminded me of an example I heard out of Iowa a number of years ago, but I still thought it was a great idea. I think it was Oskaloosa, Iowa, but I might be wrong. But they went to their old yearbooks and found all the people who perhaps didn't live in the community anymore, but they knew that they were successful attorneys, architects, doctors that had moved to some other cities. And they were very successful just sending those people a letter. And they were trying to fund their facade grant program and asked them each to kick in $500, sort of that tie back to their home community, and thought it would really pull on their heartstrings to fund such a thing. So as we move through this and out of this, we would highly recommend that you establish a rainy day fund.
I'm going to talk about sort of philosophies about cutting costs. For a few minutes here. There are sort of ways that you want to think about, how you look at your budget, and this might be useful for the board to discuss. There are three ways. I'll talk about each one in order. So across the board cuts to all budget areas except staff. So the positive things about this is that it's democratic, it's easy to understand, and everybody believes it's a shared sacrifice. You know, the design committee gets cut 10%, the promotion committee gets cut 10%. It's not hard to understand, people get it. But in doing this, the sort of negative things about it are it cuts all the easy things first. Like there's some things that just can't get cut, like you can't cut the internet access by 10%. That doesn't happen. But some line items cannot be cut. But the ones that are the most vulnerable, staff, although we're not talking about staff with this one, but committee costs and that sort of thing, that's easy to go at right away. But again, in the sort of way of looking at it, staff is not the first thing to cut here, and nor should it be in general. You're not going to be cutting any profit centers. So if you know that your event, nets $12,000 and you're having it in September, and that seems like it's going to be pretty safe, you're not going to be cutting 10% out of that. So that's one way of looking at it. It's good. This kind of method is good for like shortfalls that are small, like it's a $10,000 loss that we're thinking that we're going to have. So maybe that scenario will work for you. Then the next one is cut salaries or furlough staff for limited periods of time. So this is cutting all salaries, or furlough, meaning laying off people for a limited amount of time. It's the positive things about it. It's fair. Everybody understands it. It's understood. There's a shared sacrifice. The negative things are the higher paid staff can withstand the cuts, but the lower paid staff, even a 10% pay cut may have very, very serious ramifications for their family budget. It's, may not be permitted. If you I don't know how many Main Street organizations are in a union, but so that wouldn't work in that kind of environment. You also wouldn't be filling any staff vacancies that you have now, so that those get put aside. We're not going to be filling those jobs. And furloughs are essentially pay cuts, but the personnel get days off. And the idea is that you're going to hire them again at some future date, or when we're in recovery. That's harder to implement, obviously, when you're starting to cut people for months at a time or for weeks at a time. And then the third one is selective cuts to specific program. It could be services or personnel. So the thing here is you're going to be cutting the weakest programs, or the ones that really make no sense anymore, or that really don't matter given the current crisis that we're in. It's a variation. We might keep some programs whole, like maybe you'll keep all of your promotional programs whole because they're all revenue generators, as an example. But you're going to be cutting other things that don't bring in revenue, sadly, maybe design, or maybe even the economic restructuring. But it's, for morale, from a committee standpoint, that might be much harder to take for your community, but it creates winners and losers by doing it that way. But it may be the most effective. So your board is going to have to make a decision about how they want to look at the budget cuts that they're making, and to try to decide really which makes most sense. Now, Winston Churchill was the one that said, "Don't waste a crisis." And I agree with that. And what it does is it allows you to eliminate programs that don't make sense anymore. Maybe there is some event that you do that barely makes money, or that you're afraid is going to begin to lose money. Well, this might be the moment to finally say, time for that to go. It's also a great time for you to consider the relationships that you have with partner organizations. Perhaps there are organization affiliations that you may look to, maybe a merger after we're in recovery. But it's an opportunity to have these kind of conversations with some of the organizations that you're partnering with, and see if there are new relationships that can be created. So this epidemic, this pandemic, really creates a lot of organizational opportunity. Some of your board member may really rise to the occasion, and others just won't deal well with conflict. But I do think that particularly for staff, they'll look upon it hopefully as an opportunity, and look at it with great creativity. So besides staff, another big line item, if you pay for rent, is rent. You already know your landlord, and they might even be a board member. So this might be an awkward conversation. But if you do pay rent, maybe these funds can be put off or be cut in half, or even if that could be the case, that could really make a big difference. But again, you're going to be stressing the relationship to see if there's any room or opportunity for negotiation about the rent, to put it off for a few months, if that's possible. Some of you may also be considering moving to a free or cheaper space. That might be a good alternative, but please make sure you look at all the costs of reconnecting your internet access and moving costs, et cetera, to see if it really makes the difference, if it's only really a short-term 3-month problem with the rent. So without staff, there really is no continuity or glue that holds the committee or the board together. So there's a variety of ways you can look at this, but certainly the most important thing is to have a conversation with the board. The executive director really needs to be highly involved with these conversations, and participate in any kind of scenario planning. The board chair or the executive committee should be meeting with the executive director to discuss the options before a decision is made, and not meeting with them and then telling the executive director what the decision is. It's a shared sacrifice for everybody, particularly if we're asking people to have their hours cut by They used to work 40 hours, now they're going to work 30. But it's a shared sacrifice for the organization so that they can survive, so that the board, so the hard work that you're doing to save the downtown and save the downtown businesses can really be focused on and continued as we come into a recovery. So if the board is considering furloughs, you should have an agreement with the staff to look at those again in 60 or 90 days, because if you're going to go through the point of having a furlough, staff should understand when the furlough will be lifted, or when the board would consider lifting it again. So 60 or 90 days may be viewed as a temporary staffing change. But please, most importantly, make sure if you do pay for health benefits now, to please don't cut them. Work out something with the staff to keep paying their health benefits. So the crisis, Kathy, could you advance, please? Thanks. Thanks so much. So really what you're going to be doing is you're going to be doing some scenario plannings. You're going to understand the current cash flow and what the cash flow is for the next 60 or 90 days, and make sure that you're gathering as much cash into your budget as you possibly can by asking funders, the city government, or other supporters, sponsors, if you can recharacterize any grants or money that you already have in the checkbook so that can be used for unrestricted operating budget. You're working with the funders now to remove obstacles to the use of their money. To have it come in early is one way to gather more cash. So we're going to talk about some specific actions in a few minutes, and Kathy's going to be talking a lot about particular fundraising activities that some towns have begun to undertake for their organizations, as opposed to working with about the small businesses. But we'll be happy to talk about that a little further. Kathy.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. Before changing this slide, I did also just want to comment on Donna's given a lot of great ideas, and as I've talked to people, I know it's uncertain what our budget implications are going to be to each and every Main Street program out there. But you know what's happening to your businesses and the kind of setbacks they have. It's going to be so important that they also see that you are being good financial stewards of the investment that they've made. But it's likely, you could all be facing a minimum 25% cut in your budget. So you really need to have these conversations with your board, as Donna indicated. The next area we wanted to talk about is communications, because it is so important that above any time that we need to be communicating with all of our stakeholders. We have to be sharing with them the value that we bring, and again, that you are the best poised to bring your downtown back, and that is a key role for you to play, and should be that message that you carry forward as you talk to your partners. So as we talked about with the focus on your work, right now your message should be that your focus is on the economic recovery of your downtown and helping your small businesses survive through that. And again, if we've always said, Main Street is an economic development program, and the whole reason we went through the refresh of Main Street 5 years ago was because many communities were seeing their Main Street programs were the party people, because everybody just saw that they were the ones that did all the festivals in downtown, and we stressed and encouraged and hoped that you would all more establish yourselves as that economic development entity. If you haven't done that, you're going to have to work really hard right now to get that message out there, that this is exactly why you have a local Main Street program, is because you are there and the best that will be available to help communities. This was a great email that Catherine Beck sent out to all the municipalities in Florida. that had Main Street programs. And so I'm sure that your coordinating programs, or hope that your coordinating programs, are also reaching out to the communities. This was just a letter to the mayor that just said, we understand, that Main Street is going to be so important. This model works. We want to encourage you to make sure you're working with Main Street programs. We want you to strengthen that relationship with Main Street programs, and hopefully to assure that you continue to give Main Street the resources it needs. So hopefully we won't have Main Street programs on the chopping block at municipal level, but rather just the opposite happens, that they can see that value that you bring and you will be supported. So again, just shifting and focusing and telling your story about the work that you're doing. We have seen so many excellent stories of the things that you have been doing to support your small businesses through marketing and communications, through assistance with business assistance and retention. And you've tried to develop a greater economic development capacity working with your partners. And you're also taking the time to look at the economic impact of what is happening in your communities. We want to do it with a positive message. We are here. We're sharing all the resources that we possibly are finding out there. This came from the International Economic Development Council, which came out of their report called Leadership in the Times of Crisis. It's a 300-page report, but they do include health issues as one of the disasters, not just tornadoes and hurricanes and floods, et cetera. But one of the things that they state in there, that many local, regional, and state governments turn to their publicly and private funded economic development organizations to be the economic leaders. So you have such a role to play here. Because with so much at stake, it's vitally important that Main Streets build capability to serve their communities by leading resiliency and economic recovery efforts before and after disasters. So we have a really good support system for you, and hopefully that message can be shared in your communities. Staying connected to your small businesses. I mentioned some people said, well, they didn't even have all the email addresses of their businesses. So hopefully let's fix that. Some of you have been doing surveys directly to your communities, sharing the results as well, understanding what is happening in their communities. I wanted to also encourage you that we're doing a national survey of small businesses. I believe well over 1,000 or 1,500 small businesses have already completed this survey. So that was shared in one of our last weekly emails. If you want to get your businesses to share, that's going to help us at state and federal with advocacy efforts there to let them know this is what our businesses are experiencing. So please encourage them to fill that out as soon as they can. It's open through Friday. Again, telling your story. What are you doing now to help businesses? Whether you have your own local business resource center, whether you're trying to raise funds for small business assistance, even if you're doing one-on-one things like helping them set up a web page or online selling, or just promoting them through Facebook, doing whatever you can to help them. Make sure we're telling everybody what we are doing. And what kind of plans do you have to help jumpstart that recovery? Some of that might come out of the conversations you have with your board, and you're talking about what you're going to do with the budget that you have now. It's going to be different for every community, but what's your plan going forward? And then make sure you've got that communications plan. How often are we reaching out to people? Is it every day? Is it once a week? Are we giving them a variety of email communications or Facebook communications? And always make sure you're showing the value that your organization is adding to that recovery. Here, we are the place to come for our businesses to get that resource. And then make sure you're creating and maintaining community traditions and sort of the way that you're reaching out to people as well. So those are some important communication messages. This one came from Menominee, Wisconsin. Again, this one came from the board president, can come from the executive director, but the volunteers getting messages out there are great. However you reach out, we're still here. This, recognizing that the coronavirus is a serious threat to the community, but emphasizing that we're still here to work to ensure that our small businesses do not become the next victims of this virus. This is the time to come together to ensure our downtown remains vibrant. So we want to send that positive message out to people that we know that there was a beginning to this, there's a middle, and we're going to come out of it. We don't know exactly what that timeline is, but we will come out of this eventually. Harrisonburg Downtown Renaissance has been doing a great job keeping up with people. Andrea Donna was one of the participants and speakers in our webinar last week. She did a fantastic job and talked about the different things that are going on in Harrisonburg. So I love the messages that they are getting out to people about what we're doing, and they continue to work on different things every day. Here was a video that they put together with Harrisonburg Economic Development and the Chamber of Commerce. And you can find that on the Harrisonburg Downtown Facebook page if you want to see that. But how can you help? So they're actually sending the message out to the people in the community on how to support businesses. A couple other things they did as an advocate, they suspended meals taxes. That's pretty pro-business. That was very good. They also just worked with a bank that established a $50,000 loan pool that will also be accessible to small businesses within their district. Whatever each of those steps are that you're taking needs to be communicated to the public. And for each of you, that might be different. It might be social media. It might be your local newspaper. It might be through email communications. But just make sure that you understand you've got a lot of different partners and you should be reaching all of them through this process. This is Charlestown, West Virginia. She's doing a daily Facebook Live from her home to keep in touch with stakeholders. She gets a lot of people tuning in. They give away $25 gift cards each day that people watch and listen in, and she can give different updates on any new businesses that might be providing online sales or restaurants that are changing hours. We know there's a lot of changing as we get into this crisis with restaurant hours as well. And just some other examples. This one from one of the DC districts. We're here to help. That's a great message to tell people. We're here to help. Here are our key resources. A lot of you have your own resource pages. A lot of you are directing people to the National Main Street Center's COVID-19 resource page as well. Whatever you want to send them to is great. This is another example. I'm not going to go through each of these, but this is from the H Street district also in DC. And these were some of the things that they've been reaching out to, working on advocacy with, what are all the things that we might be able to get that will help our small businesses, whether it's to delay tax payments, excuse me. If you're in a town that, owns the utilities, you could, see if there can be some adjustments made there. But this is sort of their whole plan of what they put together for financial policy options. And this is just another community that put out a good positive message to people that, lets people know we are resilient. We're going to get through this. Here's our mission. We're going to provide coordination, collaboration, and partners that unify our community around a vision for our attractive and vibrant downtown. So in the coming weeks, they know it's still going to be challenging, but again, they list the resource page on their website. And then just ramping up. Oh, go ahead. Is that one yours, Donna? Sorry.
Okay, sorry. So your local program can add a lot of value to local business owners, even if they're closed by the governor, to know about the various small business recovery programs at the state and federal levels. Certainly the SBA programs, and maybe your state or your city has already developed small business programs. That's been the case here in Philadelphia, where I live, and I know a lot of the local commercial corridors here in the city have been directing their small business owners to applying for state and city programs. Particularly if you're willing to help your small business owners apply for these programs if they need or want assistance, you can learn a lot about what the small business needs are and be able to speak much more effectively and advocate for their needs to city council or to your state elected officials if you were putting together any kind of financial responses or program for small business owners. But make sure you keep your state coordinator involved by sharing any letters that you're sending to legislators or any local news pieces that are being written about you and your efforts that are happening in your town. You might also want to look at this funding source from American Express to see if it makes sense for you. Yes, we know the deadline is today, but as you know, the National Main Street Center has an ongoing relationship with American Express. So you may want to take a look at this after this workshop to see if it's a funding program that you want to look at. Kathy.
Yeah, then we're going to get into what does fundraising for the future look like. I think also in the whole communications aspect, it's not automatic that, you know, you should go to your funders and ask them for money right now. You might also want to just do a check-in on them. How are you doing? That's all we're doing is, yeah. That's all we want to do is know how you're doing. I think that's the thing that we've learned from everybody is we're all isolated now. And so how are your funders doing? And sometimes that's the best relationship you can keep is just that they know you care about how they're doing. So if you move forward with fundraising, and at some point we will, but, you know, it's sort of in these uncertain times, the stability of your annual support is needed. You know, include how your organization is actually responding and again, carrying out your mission, the kinds of help you're doing, if you're surveying businesses, if you're providing supplies to somebody, if you're getting businesses to work together, if you're trying to look ahead to prepare for the future. So it's really to, you know, we need to inject that comfort and optimism and that we care without necessarily panicking everybody about it. But if you were to do some sort of campaign right now and helping, you know, to help get some support for the organization it might be something like this. If you send out an email, and this would only be to a select group, you would not just generally send out a huge email, but if you felt like you had some stable, long-term, substantial supporters of your organization, the subject line may say coronavirus consequences, emergency funds needed. You want to make sure that the message expresses some urgency, if you have that, and notes why it's important to them. You know, why have they been funding you all along, and do we want to carry that forward? Describe how that pandemic has impacted your organization. You know, did you have to lay off people, close your office, that you lost 50% of your funding? Explain that. Then ask for that special gift. You might share a story of a recent success you had since stay-at-home orders have become the norm. Maybe how, you know, the closing of some businesses have been helped. Tell them again how you'll use their gift of support. And then, you know, end again by saying, of course, this event was not in our budget. No one expected it. No one planned for it. But if their help at this time is able to be done, you would be forever grateful for that.
One of the things that, one of the easiest way to have these conversations is to thank people. And when was the last time you just said thank you to your longstanding supporters? Today might be a very good day to do that. And a message of thanks is personal, particularly if it's just a call to check in, as Kathy mentioned, without it even being a call to ask for support. You know, if you can learn a lot from these calls. You can learn that help you determine whether now might be the right time or maybe the wrong time for you to be asking for additional support for your organization. But unless you're calling to thank people in a sincere way, now you'll never be able to. You're focusing on the relationship, and that's really, really important. What you might also want to do is to look at your supporter list and people that are at the highest level, and to see how they're doing. They might be, some of them might be hurting from the crisis, but you might have businesses that are actually doing very, very well because of this crisis. But really, my concern is focusing on the relationship, but also saying thank you. And you'll only know by having those conversations if it's now is the right time to do a special appeal. Kathy's going to talk about what some towns are doing in a minute. Kathy?
Okay, sorry. So some of the businesses, as Donna said, might be less impacted through this period or this pandemic. So maybe those would be the ones that you might be able to focus some of your focused fundraising efforts to. I live in New Hampshire, and the little town I live in has an Associated Grocer warehouse, and they're in the process of hiring 100 people down there. We also know that some of the national chains are doing really well, though I don't know that we've had a lot of success with tapping into Dollar Generals and Family Dollar, et cetera, CVS, Rite Aid, the big drugstores are doing very well right now. But look at the professionals in your community. Are there still industrial businesses that are doing well? Utilities, phone companies, cable providers. I didn't see my utility bill going down, nor my internet company didn't reduce my bill, so they must be doing okay. And there might be others in your community that aren't as financially impacted by this. So if you are going to try to do any kind of campaign, those would be the ones perhaps to focus on in the coming weeks or months ahead. And then this was, sort of, I worked in the South Main Street district in Little Rock earlier this year. And this was their message sort of prior to COVID-19. And I thought it was good, just, emphasizes your financial support means so much to us. And, they note sort of what that local businesses mean. One of the important pieces that they have is that ability to accept contributions through their website. Again, Donna and I have both emphasized that you should be able to take contributions through your website or PayPal. So if that has not been done yet, that might be a priority for you right now as well.
Please do that. Yeah.
Yes. I also saw Gallatin, Tennessee did a GoFundMe page this week, talked about that. They were going to use any money that was raised to buy gift cards to support the local businesses. I thought that was a great idea as well. And they did their nice little graphic all for Gallatin. Good example. So just a couple things that we've seen communities doing. Donna?
Yeah, what you may want to do is if the board members give annual gifts to the organization, you might want to ask them if it's possible for them to speed up those gifts so that you can create, so you can bundle them and basically turn it into a challenge grant, so that if you're doing a community-wide campaign, you can have matching the money that your board has put up. It could be very, very effective, challenge grants. I mean, that's the reason why we see so often that public television and public radio do it. Another thing to do is, if you have outstanding pledges, you may want to make a call or an email to ask if the person that's pledging can make the gift this year, and that we could use the money now if that would be possible. But if you find that people are just not able to send a check right now, you're going to have to be extraordinarily polite and grateful and empathize, because everybody's financial situation with this crisis is going to be very different. But certainly tell them that you'll be thinking about them, and that you'll be contacting them again once the recovery begins. This list is really terrific, and it has links to all the COVID responses page that the National Main Street Center has on its website, and they all have live links associated with it. And it's really an excellent group of resources to start with. And so the links from the handout are going to be certainly on the handout page that we're going to be supplying you. But you can also go to the National Main Street Center's website for the COVID-19 resource page, and you'll find all of these resources there.
I just wanted to note too that some of you have in-state foundations. We have the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation here in New Hampshire that set up a community crisis action fund. It was kind of nice several years ago. Our charitable foundation recognized that it was easier for nonprofits to find project funding, but they couldn't find operational funding. So you might look to see if your foundations have made changes that now they would consider operational funding as a key to help our communities and our nonprofits get through. So be sure to check out any in-state foundations that you might have. I also got, and the copy of this letter is actually in the handout section today, but all the communities, and oh, sorry, I spelled Maine wrong. That's M-A-I-N-E, downtown center. They had a letter that was signed on by all of their Main Street communities, and basically we're asking for financial support, technical assistance in communications, and relaxation of regulations. The full letter and also the press release that went along with it are on the handout section of this webinar. So use those, fashion them for your own use, and make sure that you're reaching out to local, state, federal delegations as well. And, you know, some of you might have the capability, if you had a fundraising event that particularly had perhaps a silent live auction component, is that something you can take online? Not everybody's going to be able to do that. There might be a small window to do that, as a lot of people might be looking at that kind of option. But Bidding for Good is a site that a lot of people use for doing online auctions. I've bid on things on that website through our preservation foundation here, but you know, again, that might be an option you turn to. And some communities have been doing smaller things. All of these will help fill the pieces of the puzzle to raise money for your organizations. Morgan City, Louisiana has a cool t-shirt, sweatshirt that is available in Livermore, California. Their t-shirt, which says Livermore 6 feet apart but connected at the heart. So I don't expect that these are going to, you know, if they raised a couple $1,000s, well, that's a couple $1,000s that we had in our budget that we didn't before. So that might be something. And while I'm not an Amazon shopper, they do have the Amazon Smile program where you can sign up to donate. So with a lot of people who are currently doing a lot of online shopping to stay home, that might be a chance for you to ask people if they are going to do that. I don't even know that you'd want to have any big campaign about it, but at least with your close people, I did find that we have some. I didn't find a lot of Main Street organizations connected with it, probably for good reason. But with more shopping that might be done in the coming months, it's an alternative for you, at least to consider. Donna?
Okay, I developed a list of resources in looking around and preparing for this presentation. And they're sort of in three categories: financial resilience, fundraising advice, and events advice. You might just want to click through some of these. They might be useful to you depending on sort of what issue you're dealing with at present. But this is also on the National Main Street Center website, and it's on one of the handouts on our webinar today. This is called the bibliography.
Just a plug for the next webinar that we're going to be doing. Norma Ramirez-Demise is going to be doing one next Tuesday at noon called Leading Through Crisis. So if you want to sign up for that, look for the link. That will be out shortly. Just another Winston Churchill quote. He's so good at that. The pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity. The optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. Again, we're going to get through this, and we want to try and provide every resource and encouragement for you to get through in the best that you can. And I think at this point, we will open it up for Q&A. Kelly? Any questions come in?
We have had quite a few questions come in during the program. I see a few people raising their hands. We're not going to use the hand raise function today, so if you are doing that, go ahead and type your question into the chat function and I'll read it aloud. I also just want to make a note too that during the program, I chatted everyone a link to access the slides. The upload of those slides to the handout section wasn't successful today, but there is a live link to the slides, and you should have it in your chat messages. I'll put it back up on top for you. And so just starting off with questions, one that I'll just address off the top too about the survey that we mentioned for businesses. There is going to be more clarification offered later today on the point about how communities can, what level of information will be available to communities. Certainly everyone in the Main Street American Network will be able to benefit from the aggregated report that we will put out. We're still clarifying what our capabilities in getting individual community level data out is to everyone. So looking through our questions that came in during the program. Oh, sorry, one more note on the survey that Norma asked me to mention. The survey is coming out also in Spanish today. So if you have Spanish-speaking business owners, please make sure to also have that survey distributed to them, and there'll be a note to those business owners as well to accompany it so that you can communicate with them. If you don't have a Spanish translation available at the local level, we have a note prepared for you. Okay, so a question for our presenters about revenue from annual dues and memberships. And one of our participants is asking, if that has dropped out completely, how do we combat businesses from dropping out? Some of this I'm sure we addressed during the program, but I think if you're experiencing a loss of 30% of income just from that source, what are some other strategies to help kind of ameliorate that?
Kathy, you want to try first?
Well, yeah, I think it was sort of Donna kind of covered it in the last couple of slides, is that hopefully you're not looking at it as permanently lost revenue. That, yes, we know anybody who would have, their $200 dues are due next month. They're not going to have it. The good news is if we're out of this pandemic by the fall, many of our downtown retailers, at least, do most of their business in that fourth quarter, and so maybe it's just a matter of asking them, can you postpone it? Could they and maybe even offer the option of making some kind of contribution in a monthly form. It's hard to say exactly, what to use to replace it. I'd recommend going to that's another reason you can ask your cities for more funding, is because you are going to have such a substantial loss there, especially if they're able to do things directly for businesses to help them. But that they would maybe help cover that. Again, it might be, I know a lot of businesses act more as a membership-based organization. This would be the time then for you to make yourselves a community-funded organization, that you are asking your industry and businesses outside of the downtown to support you, and really just, sort of look at all components of where funding might come from, and say, well, here's where our best shot is. So maybe, that $200 membership could be made up by contacting a local corporation that might give you $5,000 a year and would sort of cover the membership for folks. Donna, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. If you're not asking local residents to support your organization, and you're relying on the property owners and the merchants to be your primary revenue sources, it's time to look to local residents, because they're the primary beneficiaries of all the work you do. They get a cleaner downtown, it's more beautiful, a variety of shops and restaurants, all the festivals and activities that you do. They're the ones that benefit from all this. Certainly local government does, and certainly individual property owners are seeing an increase in their value of their buildings, hopefully. But really, if you're not asking local residents to support you, now's the time to at least plan for it during the recovery. You can begin to think about, well, how are you going to approach all your residents by having a table at every event staffed by volunteers, to be asking people to support your organization. It can be very nominal gifts, $15, $25, whatever seems to make sense in your community from a charitable giving standpoint. But those people are really critical for the success of your organization long term. They should be asked to support it.
Well, thanks, y'all. We have some more questions coming in too. Certainly important to also be thinking about organizations in different types of formats. And so we have a question on recommendations for bids or best practices for cutting services that might be specifically funded by bids, planning for shortfalls with stakeholders not being able to pay assessments rather than membership dues.
You want me to go, Donna?
Yeah, I'll come after you, sure.
Yeah. And I know bids are a little bit different with every state, and really how some of that funding may or may not be able to be changed, because bid funding has to be used for the good of all in a downtown. So based on whatever is present, and I know every situation with bids is also different, because the Main Street organization acts as the bid, and then others, like when I was an executive director, bid was my funding source, but I went to a separate bid board with my work plan every year, and then we got 2 payments from the bid. Would be, if that's the scenario, I would go back to the bid and say, we need to use our money for this. I don't know that, some bids are set up on property valuation, as it was in my community. So that is still in place. The property owner is still going to have to pay that. So I don't know that the bid is going to have to be adjusted completely unless the bid is 100% of your funding source. Then it's going to be a little bit trickier to figure out, like you can't take that money and just give it away to some of the businesses. There are legal requirements about how bid funding is in place. I was kind of hoping that those that had bids would have some of the more secure funding in place, I guess, unless the city sort of freezes people's need to pay that. Hopefully that maybe that's something you advocate for not happening in your community, because you're going to have to get the funding from some sources. So maybe we try to work with our cities on not exempting people from having to pay that, because we need it now more than ever to help them come back. Donna?
Yeah, I was thinking that, if our downtown is closed by the governor, there probably isn't the same level of need for cleaning as if you were paying for cleaning crews, 5 days a week or 7 days a week. Maybe that is a way that we can furlough a small portion of that staff to, with the idea that when we come back, we will reinstate all those folks. But right now, to have 17 people out cleaning when nobody is on the streets, maybe that doesn't make sense. So it could be, looking at what makes sense for your community. So many bids are using their money for clean and safe activities, and I understand that that's not going to go away. But maybe it's a matter of reducing it by 25%, or maybe even 50%. But with the idea that once we go into recovery and our businesses are able to be open again, we'll go right back to 100%.
Great suggestion, Donna. I just want to jump in with a couple more questions. And again, if we don't address them all, please follow up with us, and we'll try to get to your questions via email. A question from Liz: How do you suggest balancing the messaging of optimism and helping our small business survive this? It seems like those could be conflicting tones for people who are really facing hard challenges.
I thought we had a couple of good examples of how communities have messaged that, and we do hope that, if you've got a good example to share as well, you'll share that with us so that we can get it into our resource center. But I hear more of it, every day on the news, that there is going to be an end to this. And I think you have the great opportunity to be the leaders of that optimism. And it is going to be tough, though. We are going to lose some businesses through this. I think we've seen that through some of the surveying that's already been going on. If this lasts a lot longer, we could start losing businesses within a month or two. And if it goes on longer than that, we might lose some. But you're still the best organization to be in place to deal with that and to deal with those vacancies and helping your properties and landlords. So I would just say, let's everybody keep sharing the messages that you develop, because I've seen some good ones out there already. Connect to more people. Look for more programs on Facebook pages and follow them and watch the messaging that they're doing, because there's a lot that are indeed ripped off and duplicated. Donna, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was thinking that many of us are trying to navigate it, this pandemic in our own family situations. Maybe one spouse is unemployed, maybe you've had your hours cut or what have you. So I think that the empathy and the focus on trying to understand people's personal situations is really important. And I think that if we could lead with that and asking people how they're doing and understanding really what the choices people are facing, I think we do well by that.
Yeah.
Okay, oh, go ahead, Kathy. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say that's a great point.
I want to throw one final question in there as we want to end the program in just a couple of minutes here. But what impact do we think that all of this will make for municipalities, and how might the federal government be reducing funds to cities, or what impact do you see this as a trickle down to main streets?
I think that all of us should be watching what the federal, certainly this first round of federal stimulus, or actually it's probably the second, but what's going to be coming out of Washington, because this round of stimulus, at least what I read in the New York Times every day, local government and state government think that this was not enough. So there's going to have to be another round of stimulus that comes that are going to be directly focused on local and state government. So we're going to have to be advocates for our local businesses to tell our state and our Congress people what we really need. And if you don't have a relationship with your elected officials, well, now's the time to start. So we really need to be communicating regularly with them so that they understand what you're seeing on the ground level, because no one else has the ear to the street like you do. And you can tell elected officials what you need.
Yeah, good answer. We don't have a crystal ball, obviously, to know how it's going to impact cities, towns, villages across the country. But I expect that we're seeing reductions in obviously rooms and meals tax. So the things that fund our CVBs and our tourism programs and the things you use to do your marketing and promotions and just sales tax coming in, all of those things are going to have an impact on our local communities. And if we all stay home for now, hopefully our recovery will begin sooner than later. Mm-hmm. But we wish you all the best of luck. You're on the front lines, and we know you're going to handle the job and make sure your Main Street organizations get through this.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone,
Thanks,
for participating. We do have a follow-up survey that will get automatically sent to you after the webinar. Please take a moment just to answer a few open-ended questions about how Main Street can continue to support you. They'll help inform the next program that Kathy mentioned. Recording of this will be available in about 24 hours, posted online. So we appreciate all of your attention today, and best of luck to you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.